Something's going on in the presidential elections. And what the heck does that have to do with criminal law? Well, Joe Biden just announced that Kamala, I'm probably going to butcher her name a number of different times. Kamala, Kamala, people are saying it all different ways. Kamala Harris is somebody who used to be a prosecutor. She was the attorney general for California. She was a district attorney, and she now has just joined the Joe Biden ticket. Much to my dismay, of all of the people who were involved in this election this year, Kamala was probably the worst in my mind. And it's not necessarily because of her politics. If you're a regular of this show, I try not to align too much with one side or the other. It's just not something that I think is very productive. I want to be a free thinker, and the parties have it wrong in a number of different areas. So when I'm talking about Kamala and I'm talking about the Biden campaign, I'm really mostly kind of grossed out by her record, by Kamala's record as a prosecutor. It is horrendous. And she has sort of repositioned herself for this election as somebody who is a reformer, somebody who is, behind Jussie Smollett, somebody who's behind George Floyd. She's sort of championing the cause, the movement here. But she was the one responsible for putting people in prison for marijuana offenses and not providing exculpatory evidence to other people who've been charged with crimes. So this is a big deal. This is somebody who, in my mind, look, she's got a lot that we can rag on her for. She's got the whole history with, extramarital sexual relationships and all of those things, which are all gross in their own right. But what we're talking about on this show is her record as a prosecutor, which is very, very bad. And for her to now suddenly flip the script and say, I'm somebody who's been for justice reform and for progress in this area is totally disingenuous. So, the bad news is that we have somebody who is literally a breath away from the presidency. If Biden gets elected, Kamala's number 2. She's the vice president. She's going to be in charge of a lot of these things, and her record for criminal justice, her record for putting people in prison for marijuana offenses and for refusing to give people information about their crimes, refusing to exonerate people, it's really, really gross behavior. This sort of the epitome of everything that I think is wrong with the justice system. This woman embodies it, and it has nothing to do. She's got policies on green energy and taxation and all of those things. I've got issues with all politicians on a number of different issues, but Kamala was the one who used to be a prosecutor, and now she's on basically the top of the ticket. Many people are saying that she's sort of the pseudo president, or because of Biden's mental state, which is a separate subject. But my point is, she's right there. She's a stone's throw away from the presidency, and she's got a troubling record. This new come to light, come to Jesus moment is welcomed. We're happy that she's seeing the light on some of her malfeasance, but she was a big part of the problem for a number of years, and she used her record as a prosecutor to shotgun her to the front of the line. She used her relationships and her history and her record there as to become a senator, and then to now run for president and become the vice presidential candidate. So it's a bummer that she's on there. It's a bummer that we have to see her so close to a position of power that really has a strong impact throughout the rest of the country. But the good news is, we now have a lot of content for the foreseeable future. Kamala's record is so bad and so long that we can talk about it for ages. So we have 70-something days until the election. I may decide to just live stream every day because we need to get through a lot of this material. So today we're not going to go into, all of the different webs and all of the different angles and the different roads that we could explore with Kamala, but we are going to talk about some of the broad strokes. I want to just give you a quick article. There's an article from reason.com that does a good job of sort of fleshing out a lot of the big bullet points. And so let's take a look at that. Let's dive in. So this article comes from reason.com. Now, if you are, depending on what your political leanings are, reason.com, some people will look at that site and they'll say, those guys are libertarians, they're right wingers, they're conservatives, they, do whatever you want with that. It's something that I think the record speaks for itself. So just because it comes from a website that you may not approve of doesn't mean that the information's necessarily bad. So let's take a look at it. So here recently, Harris positioned herself during the primary campaign as a reformer who has tirelessly worked to correct the abuses of the criminal justice system, which is wrong. And we're going to talk to you about that. Her record is a huge part of the problem. She confronted Biden in the debates about his atrocious record on race and law and order policies. And so, you know, she's claiming that he's got a bad record, which is true, right? Joe Biden was one of the authors of the 1994 crime bill, if I'm not mistaken, and some other legislation sort of during the previous generation, this tough on crime attitude that a lot of the politicians had back then that's responsible for a lot of the problems that we're seeing today. You know, the stuff that was set in place in the 90s, the bill is becoming due. The George Floyd protests, these Black Lives Matter protests, the things that we're seeing pop up in Portland and throughout the country, these are all, this is the bill. These policies have been in place for 30 years, and now people are fed up with it, and that's what you're seeing on the streets. Well, Joe Biden had a big part of that, right? The Clinton era did, Hillary Clinton did, Joe Biden did. These are their policies that we're now seeing become massively problematic, and Kamala Harris was somebody who was enforcing those policies. So it's funny that during the primary campaign, she's now going to attack Joe for it when she was also a huge part of the problem. Then Joe taps her to be vice president. So of course, bygones will be bygones. They're not going to talk about that stuff anymore. So what is the problem with Kamala in my mind? Well, the article starts off, it goes through a lot here. She talks about basically she was penalizing sex workers. So from a libertarian standpoint, the idea is if two consenting adults want to engage in sexual contact with each other and one's willing to pay for it, what is the government's business in that private transaction? What's the big deal, right? I mean, if a woman knows what she's doing and a man knows what she's doing, or two men or two women or whatever genders is going on in that situation, what's the government's role in that? Why do they need to be involved at all? And so that's something, you know, that's kind of more of a policy issue that this article starts to go into. Reason is more libertarian minded. And so that's something, you know, you could have a reasonable disagreement about that in my mind. But what is not something that is excusable are these different incidents where she's involved in what I would consider to be actual prosecutorial misconduct. So I want to define what that is. What is prosecutorial misconduct? Well, in layman's terms, it starts with this idea that a prosecutor, somebody who is sworn into office to bring criminal charges against somebody else, they need to have sort of a higher oath of duty. You know, they've got this really, really important responsibility that they have to carry out in order to help our society function. And so they take a special oath, they take a badge, and basically, you know, they're supposed to be enacting justice. They're not supposed to be going after convictions or having a win rate or any of those things. When cases come across their desk, if they're problematic, then they need to get rid of them. You know, they need to dismiss them. They don't need to move forward and convict everybody on everything. And so prosecutorial misconduct is saying that, you know, there are special rules for prosecutors because they have special powers. When a new charge is filed, a prosecutor has to read the charges, read the police reports, and then make a statement, what's called a probable cause statement, to say, I believe there's enough evidence here to move forward with these charges under these facts against this specific individual. Then those charges get filed, and it goes through the entire criminal justice system. As it's going through that system, if a prosecutor doesn't give you certain evidence, so let's say a cop lied on the stand or a cop lied in their police report, and the prosecutor knows about that, but they don't tell you about that, well, how are you as the defense, how are you supposed to know? Well, you wouldn't, right? Because you don't have access to the same information and the same materials that the prosecutor's office does. They hold all the cards. They have all the information, all of the data, all of the body cameras, all of the police reports, all of the chemical analyses that have been done, all of the witness statements, all of the 911 calls, the GPS tracking, the DNA evidence, all of that stuff is in their possession. And so they need to have a very, very high standard of care, a very high duty, because if there's a little bit of ethical problems when they're in possession of those things, the defense would never know about it. We would never know about it because we don't have access to the same information. So they've got this really high standard, and what happens when they violate that standard? Well, it's called prosecutorial misconduct. And so the article starts here, and it's got a couple of kind of really, well, let me show you. So here's what we've got. She says, in her memoir, Harris decries America's deep and dark history of people using the power of the prosecutor as an instrument of justice. But she repeatedly went to bat for dirty prosecutors. And the article starts here. You can see it links. These are separate news articles for every one of these links that Kamala was involved in. And the first one is her office appealed the dismissal of a case in which a prosecutor had fabricated a confession to secure a conviction. So somebody, literally a prosecutor who was working under her, the allegation is that they fabricated a confession out of somebody, which is not uncommon, actually. This happens all the time. Confessions are things that happen under duress. If you're brought in, you're being questioned by the police. They put you in a room. You can be in the room for hours and hours on end. Police will ask you a million different questions, the same questions a million different times with other people asking you and coming until you give them something that they can latch onto. That's going to be your confession. So here, the allegation is that a prosecutor fabricated a confession just to secure a conviction. A confession, if you confess to a crime, it's really easy to get a conviction. And so this comes to light, and they're filing motions, appealing the case, and she decides that she is going to continue to fight on behalf of the prosecutor who secured the fabricated confession. So rather than saying that prosecutor was a piece of garbage, we should fire him from our office and actually disbar that individual, she says, oh, no, we're going to fight this. So, the trial court presumably dismissed the case, and she's appealing the dismissal, and she's basically standing behind the prosecutor who did that. And that's just one incident, right? Well, that could happen. Anybody can make a mistake on one case, but she's got a pattern of doing this. She also fought an appeal in a case where the prosecutor lied to a jury during a trial. So another one of her prosecutors tells a lie, and the defense appeals the case. Well, her office comes back and they counter that. So some of this you would think, right? That's her job. She is the head prosecutor. She's got to stand behind her office. That's two incidents of bad prosecutors who are getting away with things. In 2015, not long ago, okay, this is not ancient history. This is 5 years ago, folks. She tried to stop the removal of the Orange County District Attorney's Office from a murder trial after it repeatedly failed to turn over evidence to the defense. So right here, she tried to stop the removal of the Orange County District Attorney's Office. And so what does that mean, right? So if you're involved in a situation where you've got a defense and a prosecutor, and they're trying to negotiate about a criminal case, the defense is going to ask that the prosecutor gives them the evidence. We want the evidence because we want to see what your allegations are. What are you claiming actually happened? We need to see that so that we can build our defense. Well, Kamala's office didn't give them any of the evidence. They said, no, we're going to hang on to that for whatever reason they have. And when they were actually trying to move the case forward, move the case up, what the defense probably tried to do is say, hey, in light of this violation, we know that this prosecutor's office did not give us the materials that we needed. Because they failed to do that, they're acting in bad faith. That's prosecutorial misconduct. We're going to ask that they be excluded from this process moving forward. They're liars, and they're not good prosecutors. It's misconduct. And so she is now, of course, fighting that. Nope, no misconduct here. We're just going to continue to do things as they ordinarily would. She is somebody who now is claiming to be pro-legalization, is what she says here. But as her attorney general, she opposed marijuana legalization as late as 2014. Which is a big deal. More and more states are moving towards legalization or at least decriminalization. In Arizona, we have medical marijuana, where I think the marijuana ballot the initiative is going to be really close to passing if it's successful getting on the ballot this year. But Colorado and Nevada and a lot of these other states are moving in that direction. Kamala was opposed to that as far back as 2014, which is really not that far away. This is a big issue. There are a lot of people who are sitting in prison for stupid marijuana, dumb, nonviolent drug offenses. Absolutely, our prisons and jails are full of these offenses. And many of these people are in custody because of Kamala's position on this. For 2014 and presumably her career leading up until that point, she was somebody who was putting people in prison for marijuana. Now, fast forward 5 years, she's running for office, and now it's important that she, is on the other side of these issues. So now she's a reformer, which you can say what you want about that. In my mind, this is somebody who basically kind of say whatever she wants to execute. The ends justify the means, in other words. So as long as it gets her where she's going, she's going to be able to say whatever she wants. She opposed marijuana legalization as late as 2014, and people are sitting in prison over it. What else did Kamala do? She promoted civil asset forfeiture without a conviction as a way to fight drug rings. So promoted civil asset forfeiture without a conviction as a way to fight drug rings. This is another topic that we've discussed here on this show. We've actually did an interview with a gentleman named Scott who is on this channel. He was on this channel talking about civil asset forfeiture. So what does this mean? Well, let's say that you're stopped and you're suspected of dealing drugs or transporting drugs. You haven't been convicted yet. You haven't had a trial. No charges have been, formally filed, or maybe they have, and you just haven't been convicted yet, or whatever is going on with your case. You haven't had your day in court. You have not had a jury with your peers listen to the evidence and then find you guilty or not guilty. None of that's happened. But what is civil asset forfeiture? Well, that means that doesn't matter. We can still take all your stuff. That car that you were driving in, we're going to take it. Your house and your property, we're going to take it. We think that you were involved in a drug ring, even though you had no due process. You've never been convicted of anything. We're just going to start taking stuff from you. Cars, jewelry, watches, weapons, firearms, your home. And I've worked on cases like this where charges never actually even came. And it was a never-ending battle to try to get our client's stuff back. The government just swoops in, takes all of your stuff, and you've never been convicted of a crime. You've never been charged with anything. This was a huge, huge problem. And states are now starting to shift that. We're trying to, there's reforms all across the country to limit these civil asset forfeitures. Basically, it's illegal theft. They can come in and take whatever they want from you, but by just saying, well, we suspect that you were involved in a drug crime, or we suspect you were involved in a gang crime. And so it's sort of this civil, non-criminal area of the law, and the rules are a lot different. You've probably watched a lot of the movies and the TV shows, and so you know that when a person is charged with a crime, they have to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil law is totally different. It's a much, much lower standard. So they can just start taking stuff. And Kamala was somebody who stood behind that, was, again, somebody who was on the wrong side of the issues for a long time. And it doesn't stop there. Mass incarceration. Before her recent about face, Harris chose not to endorse proposed sentencing reforms on the California ballot in 2012, 2014, and she defended the constitutionality of cash bail until 2016. Huge problems. Okay, mandatory sentencing or sentencing reform. These are big issues. These are why people are sitting in prison, because of mandatory sentencing, because of stupid statutory laws that we have in place where you go to prison or you go to jail for really dumb crimes. Like I said, there are people in prison for marijuana crimes, nonviolent personal use of marijuana. They are in prison for that, in large part because it's mandatory sentencing, which means, so like in Arizona, for example, we have, it's a 3-strike rule. The first offense, you get kind of a slap on the wrist. Second offense is jail. Third offense is prison. So there are people in prison for marijuana. Now, Kamala did not have anything to do with Arizona laws, but the same thing was happening in California, and she took the same position back then. So no sentencing reforms in 2012, none in 2014, and then in 2016, she defended cash bail, which is another huge problem. Why? Because poor people don't have money to get out of jail. They just don't. They sit in custody, and what ends up happening is they plead guilty to charges that they shouldn't have never pled guilty to. And the reason they do that is because a prosecutor walks up to them and says, look, we know you're in custody right now, okay? We just arrested you for that domestic violence offense. Unfortunately, we're not going to let you out of custody unless you're able to post a cash bail, a cash bond of $10,000. Well, I don't have $10,000. Oh, okay. Well, Well, in that case, then you're going to sit in custody until we resolve your case, meaning, you have another court date 30 days from now. So you're going to be in custody that whole time, unless you can come up with the money. Can you come up with the money? No, we can't. I don't have that money. Okay, well, you'll sit here, or I have another idea, or we can just resolve your case right now. Oh, well, why would I do that? I haven't seen the police report. I haven't talked to an attorney. I haven't investigated it. I don't know what the accusers are saying. I don't know anything about it. And they say, well, we'll have you sign this document. We'll close your case out. And once it's closed and once the judge enters it, they'll sentence you and they'll give you credit for being in here. And then they will release you. They'll just send you on your way. And the guy will go, well, shit, I want to get out of here. I don't want to be here. And they'll sign that document. They'll sign the plea agreement and they'll get out of custody. They will have no counsel. They'll have no advice from, an outside attorney. They'll have no opportunity to go do their independent research. So they're being kind of strong-armed into taking a plea deal that they should have never taken. And it's because of this stupid system where the rich people, they're going to be able to afford it. This type of policy is really hitting hard, in particular, the poor and the minority communities. These are the people who are mostly impacted by this cash bail policy. And so that's another thing that Kamala Harris was in favor of up until 2016. 4 years ago. Now she has this come to Jesus moment, this epiphany. That type of really tough on crime, I'm going to, just wipe out the criminals and be an aggressive prosecutor. That doesn't work under the current circumstances. Now we've got people who are a lot more angry with cops and prosecutors and our justice systems. We've got shows like this. We've got entire, groups of people who are really setting out and working hard to reform the justice system. And she was on the wrong side of those issues. You can hate Trump all you want, but you may want him to lose, and you may want Kamala to win, and may think she's a million times better than him. But her record on criminal justice is atrocious. And the fact that she's going to suddenly start backpedaling on a lot of this stuff, well, we can't let her get away with that on this show. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night because it's bad. And this article is going through and highlighting it.